Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Power Man Podcast. My name is Rory Paquette, and I am, as always, your very grateful host. Folks, I cannot thank you enough for everything you've been doing lately, lifting us up, sharing our podcast. And, we've had some episodes on recently that have just blown the doors off, and it's because I've seen all of you sharing the episodes and commenting and sending hundreds of DMs. It's unbelievable. And if you're not out there doing everything you're doing, I can't sit here and do what I'm doing. So, very grateful for that. Please keep it up, and we'll keep on bringing on powerful guests like the one we have today, talking about powerful topics like this stuff we're going to talk about today, and hopefully keeping you guys happy and keep you rolling. You all know what time it is. Before we get rolling, we have to pay a couple of bills. So, let me take a sip of my preferred beverage. Yes, it's in the wrong cup. I don't need 15 DMs telling me it's in the wrong cup. I know. Good stuff right there. You guys all know what it is. It's Freedom Hill Coffee. That's right. Freedom Hill Coffee at Freedom Hill Coffee on Instagram. Go check them out. Look them up. Deep, dark, rich, bold, and beautiful. Just like my wife. They brew a mean bean. It's an absolutely fantastic cup of joe. They do all the right things for all the right reasons, and they support veterans, which you all know is incredibly important here at the Power Man Podcast. So we support them. Check them out at Freedom Hill Coffee on Instagram. Freedom Hill Coffee, good stuff. Tell them Power Man sent you. One more sip so I can keep up with this guy in front of me. Oh, and we'll be drinking that through the entire episode because that is just the lifeblood for me right there. All right, awesome. So we do have a fantastic guest today. I love the topic. I love everything this guy stands for. Please welcome to the program, author of the Path, 16 Virtues of Integrity. Also, the creator of the Confident Husband Solution. Please welcome Chuck Chapman. How you doing, Chuck?
I'm doing well, Roy. Thanks for having me on the show.
No, it's my
Appreciate it.
my pleasure. I can't wait to get into this
Yeah,
stuff. So,
me too.
you've laid down a lot of principles. People are already at home listening to this, going, "Okay, what is the Confident Husband Solution?" So, I know they can't wait to hear about it. Um, Tell me and tell our audience though a little bit about who's Chuck Chapman,
Yeah.
and what
Who's this
leads you to
guy?
be here today, right?
Right. Yeah. 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 Well, just a dude who's trying to help other dudes be better dudes. Uh, and yeah, I guess my journey started, boy, longer than I care to admit. Um, but yeah, essentially, first I did a career change. 15 years into career, I was a graphic designer, worked in advertising and marketing for corporate America.
Okay.
And then when I was 38 years old, I got thyroid cancer.
Oh
And
my
that really kind
gosh.
of rocked my life. Kind of made me question like, what am I doing and why am I here? Kind of, an existential crisis. And that led me into kind of a depression. And then that led me into seeing a therapist. And I worked with a therapist for about 3 years. And it was such a gift that I wanted to be able to offer that gift to others. So I decided to shift careers and went back to school, got my master's degree, got my license and as a psychotherapist, and started a private practice working primarily with men in the area of fulfilling their life. And so I've been doing that for about the last 15 years, and it's led me to a bunch of different places. And one of the places that led me, well, actually, just prior to me being a therapist, I had like one semester left of my master's program, and really kind of out of the blue, my wife left me. One evening, she just sat down. She said, I'm done. And I have rented an apartment and I'm leaving. And I didn't realize it at the time, but this is something that's fairly happens to a lot of guys I've found out. And I
Yeah.
call it the walk away wife syndrome, where after a while, she stops trying. And as the guys, we think, well, you know, things are kind of calm, things must be fine. But really, what's happened is she's plotting her exit, you know. waiting until the kids are grown, waiting until the finances are at a certain place, waiting, and then happens and the guy's blindsided. That was such a painful process for me. And I'm really grateful that I had a good counselor and had like good um, background. And even with that, I really, for a couple of years there, imploded. But I decided I didn't want other men to experience that. If I could prevent one guy from experiencing that, that would be worth, some of the pain that I went through. And what I realized, Rory, was that as men, you know, I don't know about you, but I had a good dad. He was a good dad, but he really didn't teach me how to be a husband. He didn't teach me like, how do you communicate with a woman? How do you keep the sexual spark going year after year? How do you engage and how do you create connection in your relationship? And and so from that was born this idea of creating a program for men to actually learn how to be husbands, how to be good husbands, and how to how to create connection, how to keep the sexual spark going, how to have a purpose in the marriage that's bigger than just we're living together.
Mm.
And so that's what I'm all about. I decided, I wanted to open up just beyond, being in the state of Oregon, being able to see clients in the state of Oregon, open up a program that was available to men worldwide. And so that's why I started this Confident Husband solution was to help us learn as husbands to become confident in our relationships and enter into our relationships with some confidence because I think that's one of the things that tends to sort of erode the relationships is I don't know what I'm doing, so I'm just gonna let her tell me what I need to do. And as long as she's happy, I guess everything's happy. It's that happy wife, happy life
Right.
kind of thing, which actually, it doesn't work that well after all.
No, I'm sorry you had to go through that. I really am.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
You're right though. It's all too common.
Mm.
And if I can just touch on it,
Mhm.
the cancer is that gone at this
Yeah.
point? You
Oh,
fighting
yeah.
it or?
Yeah. I always forget to.
Well, I just want
No,
to
it's
close that
good.
loop. That's all.
I always forget because it's a non-issue for me anymore.
Right.
Yeah, no, I had some surgery. They were able to get it, quickly before it really did anything.
Excellent.
And yeah, I've been clean ever since. So
Oh,
yeah.
God bless, man. I'm glad to hear that. I really am glad to hear that. The wife part of it,
Yeah.
walk away wife syndrome. Is that a term that you came up with, or have you heard that somewhere?
I've actually heard that someplace else before, but
Okay.
I've experienced it in my practice. I mean, I've seen it happen, where a guy comes to me and he's like, my wife just told me she wants to leave me, and I thought everything was fine, or at least I didn't think it was that bad. And as I started seeing that, I was like, and then, like I said, I experienced it myself. So at first it was just like, yeah, I know what you're going through. I can really empathize with that.
Yeah.
But then doing a little bit of research, find out like this is actually something that is really quite common. And that, yeah, the phrase walk away wife was coined by someone, I think it's an article in Psychology Today that I
Uh,
saw that and kind of
okay.
swiped
I
that.
mean, I like the term. I just want to give credit
Yeah,
where
I like it
credit was
too.
due.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, it's just really, really accurate.
It
So,
is.
I work with a lot of men on through this program, and we get
Yeah.
messages all the time in our private group. And divorce is definitely, on the rise from everything that
Yeah.
I've seen and heard. I saw a stat where over 70% of the divorces, the woman, the wife is the one who
Yeah.
instigates it,
Yep.
and that the leading cause for divorce now is something to the effect of my needs aren't being met or
Yep.
something. It's not infidelity. It's just my
Yeah.
needs aren't being
It
met.
just yeah.
I'm unhappy.
Yeah. Yeah, and it generally happens right around the age of when the kids are gone. When the kids start moving out, that's really part of where that happens.
Yeah.
is that, okay, the kids are gone. I don't have to worry about them anymore. I'm going to start taking care of myself because I'm not happy in this relationship.
It's
Yeah.
amazing that you said that because I was just going to say something like exactly like that. I'm seeing it so frequently with empty nesters.
Hmm.
And it's
Hmm.
like, the two people have been on autopilot taking care of the kids. And
Yeah.
then when they have to come together, they're like, hey, nice to meet you. Who are you now?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I
Yeah.
love, your platform here.
Thank you. Yeah.
And let's get into that because
Yeah.
we can talk all day about divorce stats and who's
Hmm.
to blame and so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, most of the time, guys don't know it's coming. But what's worse is they don't know how to avoid it or stop
Yeah.
it from happening.
Yeah.
And I think that's
Yeah.
really where you come in here. Is a lot
Right.
of these points and all these things you bring up are, hey, let's stop this train before it goes off the tracks.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So if you can kind of recognize this, and the symptoms are usually pretty subtle, and they're easy to kind of miss. And it's
Okay.
more of just like, uh, she's not happy, she's not unhappy, you know. She's, we don't seem to argue as much maybe as we used to. Um, and that uh, really what starts to happen is there's an erosion in the connection that you had with her. When we first get married or we first meet somebody, there's this, we're connecting in all sorts of ways and it's fun and it's exciting. And we think that, that's the way a relationship, well, it's just going to be that way, right? And, and then slowly over time, kind of like the proverbial frog in the pot of water, temperature starts kind of cranking up. And then all of a sudden, it hits that D day.
Right.
And, yeah, most guys just don't see it coming because of that. But I think that if we can create an awareness around, if you've been married a couple of years and, it's not good, it's not bad, or the word I like to use is tolerated. If you just feel like she's tolerating you,
Hmm.
that's a symptom right there that something isn't going right.
Right.
And the toleration generally comes when she feels like, when she doesn't feel connected,
Okay.
when she emotionally connected. And and I think that's the thing that what I want to create an awareness around is you can start to see the signs. And if you ask her, if you say, "Hey, what's wrong?" Generally, she's going to say a couple of things. Nothing's wrong, or she's going to say, "It's not you, it's me."
It's me. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. you're,
Right?
you're hitting me right in
Which
the
is
heart right
going to
now.
lead,
Oh my gosh.
which is going to lead to, I love you, but I'm not in love with you.
Oh. All right. Yeah, this is wow. You're hitting all the nails right on the head. I've heard all of these lines
Yeah.
from, men in my groups.
Yep.
Let me ask you this. You mentioned the red flags, symptoms,
Yeah.
things like that. The emotional detachment or something you were
Mm.
just talking about. The what other red flags are there? Can you tell us that? Other things to watch out for so guys might see some of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, some of the classic ones. I'm sure you're probably familiar with John Gottman. Um,
Hmm. Name sounds
no?
familiar. I'm not
Okay.
placing
John
it.
Gottman, he's a research psychologist who's been researching marriage,
Okay.
what keeps people together. And he says like within 90% accuracy, first 15 minutes of meeting a couple, he can kind of predict with, like I said, 90% accuracy whether they're going to divorce within the next several years.
Oh wow.
And so he has this up in the University of Seattle. It's called the Love Lab. And so he invites couples to come up and they spend a weekend in the Love Lab. And it's just kind of like a nice Airbnb, and they get to do that. And the caveat is that there's two-way mirrors and cameras and researchers watching their every move. And what he wanted to do is come up with a predictability of what makes what he calls in his wife's and what he calls the masters or the disasters. And the masters do things differently than the disasters. And and so after they watch these people, they follow them over the course of their marriage. And and he's been able to predict a few things that create the disasters. And the first one is let me remember all four of them. He calls them four horsemen of the apocalypse.
Wow.
And um, yeah, right. Uh, let's see if I can remember off the top of my head. There's um, contempt. Okay,
Contempt. All right. That's one of them.
contempt.
Gotcha.
All right, contempt is it's that kind of rolling of the eyes, that kind of like, "Ah, how much do I have to put up with you kind of thing, right?
Okay.
Contempt. Another one is criticism.
Okay.
Criticism, you always do this, you never do this. So when couples have a lot of criticism, and then there's the contempt, and then there's the defensiveness. You always do this. Oh yeah? Well, you're not so great yourself.
All
Right?
right.
And then the fourth one is stonewalling. You know what? This conversation's over. I'm not going to talk about this anymore.
Yeah.
And
Ending a
those,
sentence with whatever.
yeah, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so these four things tend to show up in marriages. So, and what often happens is in the beginning, the couple, especially the wife, she's making what Gottman calls a bid for connection. And it might be something like, hey, come look at the sunset. You know? And the guy's like, oh, yeah, yeah, it's great. You know?
Okay. All right.
Or hey, I want us to do more things together. And you're like, oh yeah, we should do that.
So not really connecting, just
Not
responding.
really connecting his,
Right.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Gotcha.
And then what starts to happen is he starts to feel criticized. What I do is never good enough. Doesn't seem like anything I do is good enough. Right?
Fair. Right.
And then he notices, yeah, she just kind of treats me with this contempt, tolerated, you know. And then if I bring anything up, she gets really defensive. Okay?
Yep.
And um, to the point where she's just kind of like, you know what? I'm done talking about this. The stonewalling. So those are the four things that oftentimes are red flags that come up in marriages and yeah, and so I studied with Gottman for I became a level we call level two Gottman therapist.
Okay.
So read like his all of his books and followed him for quite a bit because one of the things I like about him is that his information is science based as opposed to like an opinion, you know. Well, I
Okay.
think this is why people break up. I mean, he's got data, nearly 20 years of data following
Sure.
people to say these are the things, these are the reasons people split up in their relationships. So,
Got it.
yeah.
Now the program, let's see, it was the Confident Husband Solution.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I love the name because I
Thanks.
think we all need to be, more
Yeah.
like that. But is this program, and I'm going to let you just tell
Yeah.
about it. But my question is
Thank
this
you.
program, um, educational or informational, or is it like action plan, type of thing? Does it head anything
Yeah. Yeah.
off,
Yeah.
or just tell us about your program and kind of
Yeah. Sure.
where guys can get into it, what they can get out of it, that sort of deal.
Sure. Well, there's we call it three-prong approach. All right. For the first part is educational. And um, so there's a 12-week program. You get each week you get a lesson that comes with some homework. And it's broken down into three quadrants. Not quadrants, that wouldn't be three. Three areas. There's the
We're
and the
mincing
first one
words
is
now. Yeah, just go
right,
ahead.
right, right, right. The first one, the first leg of the stool is polarity. And this is something that I think a lot of guys don't recognize and understand. Polarity is connection. So if you think about, uh, let's say a magnet, it's got a north and a south end,
Okay.
and you bring those two ends together and it creates connection. Okay. In our dynamic as masculine and feminine, those two dynamics also create connection. But when you bring north to north or south to south, what happens is you get repulsion. Now, as humans, we have both a masculine and feminine side. And the way I sort of liken it to is I've got a right hand and a left hand. I'm dominantly right-handed, so in this case, dominantly masculine. But I have a left hand. I have a feminine part of me too, the more sensitive, feeling kind of part of me. Now, my mom is actually left-handed, and she grew up in a time where if you were left-handed, you were taught to use your right hand because they thought that that was, people with left-handed were less or something like that.
Right.
So even to this day, she's, 84 years old and she still writes with her right hand, but everything else she does with her left hand. And I think that that's kind of happened to men over the years, this sort of feminization that's happened with men, sort of starting sort of post World War II. If you read like books like Iron John, and he talks about the feminization of men. So it's almost like we have been taught to our dominant hand now becomes the feminine. And so when we bring into our relationship our feminine energy
Hmm.
and her feminine energy, we're not creating connection.
Right.
Now, what we have had, and probably rightly so, is there's been this idea of dominant, controlling, aggressive, abusive behavior that's linked to masculinity.
Right.
And we sort of thrown the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
So instead of leading, men are passive. What do you want? I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to get canceled. So I'm going to just play it safe. And what happens is then she can't feel the connection and that we need that polarity, that masculine feminine polarity in order to create connection.
Hmm.
Another metaphor would be like a nut and a screw. Okay. The purpose of a nut and a screw is to connect something. One's masculine, we call it male, and one's feminine, right? The male penetrates the female, and that creates connection. So metaphorically, whether that's sex or our entire job as the masculine in the relationship is to penetrate her to create connection.
Hmm.
So not just sexually, but in every way that we do, right?
Okay.
And she needs that in order to feel safe. The feminine's number one need, emotional need, is to feel safe. And when she feels safe, then she's more likely to open up and be receiving. But she can't feel safe when you're bringing her that more passive feminine energy. She can't trust it.
Right.
So the first
Okay.
module is all about polarity and creating connection
Gotcha.
and understanding the difference between your masculine energy, the feminine energy. And again, you're going to be in both of these things. I talk about how, but it's just being able to recognize in the dynamic of the relationship how both of these things show up in our relationships.
Sure.
The second thing, the second module is all about presence. And presence is all about the way that you show up. The feminine's all about feeling. She's all about how does he make me feel? So if he's not being present, because most of us are, I mean, we're distracted. We're trying to build a career. We're trying to deal with kids. We're trying to, make our wife happy. We're trying to do all of these different things. And we're so distracted that our ability to actually be present and engage, we're just flipping through our phones and playing video games and, you know, vegging out is to try to distract ourselves, right?
Right. Just to get
And
a
so when we
break
don't
mentally
bring,
half the time. Yeah.
right, yeah, yeah. So when we don't bring our presence to her, she can't feel us. If she can't feel us, she's not going to feel connected. And part of that presence is penetrating her with my presence, And it's not, again, dominating or rigid or anything like that. It's just
Sure.
like when she says, "Hey, look at the sunset." You put down the phone, you walk over and you go, "Wow, that is great. Thank you for sharing that with me."
Right.
Recognizing that bid for attention for what it is. And then the third part of the program is all about purpose because purpose is something bigger than me. Why are we doing this? No. Why am I staying married to this woman? What is it we're trying to create here? And I don't think most of us men think in terms of like, what is the purpose of this relationship? It's just kind of like, well, we're married and our finances are kind of woven together and we have a mortgage and kids and and so we just kind of exist. But if you don't have a purpose, then you're not going to feel excited about what you're doing, you know?
Right.
And so I
Now,
think part of the yeah, go ahead.
no, no, please, please finish. You got it.
I was going to say part of the purpose is actually creating a vision for your marriage, right?
Okay.
Because without a vision, you can't be excited. It's sort of like if you said, "Let's go on vacation." It's great. Where are we going? I don't know. When are we going? I don't know. You know, I just
Right.
know someday, at some point, we'll go on vacation. I can't get really excited about that. But if you say, let's go on vacation, she's like, where are we going to go? And you say, we're going to go to Disneyland. And she goes, oh, cool. I heard that's really great. Disneyland. Yeah, there's all these rides and there's this mice and, all this kind of stuff. And you start paying a vision, it's like, oh, okay, I'm excited. Let's go do that. Let's go do that. So as men, we don't really take the time to create a vision for ourselves and then for our marriage. And it might look something like this. Hey, babe, I want us to have the kind of marriage that our kids grow up and they emulate it. I want us to have the kind of marriage where I'm at a barbecue and one of my buddies walks up to me and is like, hey, not for nothing, but like, how do you guys connect so deeply after all these years? I want a kind of marriage that, like, when we're old, we're holding hands and we're sitting there and we're feeling the love that we've created year after year after year. What do you say? You want to join me on that? What woman's going to say no, right? And that's the idea of creating a purpose, creating a vision, a purpose, and then that's going to keep your relationship going, I think, year after year.
Nice.
So those are the three modules. So that's the learning portion of it. The second portion is it's coaching. We do a live coaching once a week with the guys that are in the program, and we talk about like what's going on in their marriage, what they've been learning in the program. Um, we'll talk about sometimes some guy will have a particular issue and he'll kind of be on the hot seat and we'll coach him through that. And other times it will be, a particular subject kind of comes up. How do you deal with menopause, something like that, right?
Right.
Uh, and so we do a live group call once a week, and those calls happen at 8 a.m. Tuesdays, 8 a.m. Pacific on Tuesdays. And then there's a community portion of it where, 24/7 you can go on there and reach out for support from other men in the program. I'm there answering questions, creating conversations online so that you've got that brotherhood um, that you can constantly connect with. And so the full program is 1 year long with, the first quadrant or first, part being the education and then taking in the rest of the year and really cementing those three things into our daily practices as husbands.
Hmm. The what I was going to ask before, I figured you'd get to it, and you did. So
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
why I jumped back was the purpose part because I immediately
Yeah.
was saying, well, now wait, you can both have a purpose, but are you talking about like as a couple having a purpose?
Mhm.
And then it's, well, how do you do that? It sounds like a lot of this that you're proposing is men learning how to lead again
Yeah.
and lead
Yeah.
themselves, lead their
Yeah.
marriages. Whenever you're going to have a
Yeah.
change, somebody has to go first. So,
Absolutely.
and it's up
Yeah.
to us as
Right.
men to take that step, right?
Well, there's only one steering wheel in a car.
Right.
Somebody has to drive,
I love
you
it.
know? So it's not about like, like I said, like dominance or anything like that. It's just like I'm gonna take the first step,
Right.
you know?
So as you talk
Yeah.
about learning to lead, then your book, the path, 16 virtues
Yeah.
integrity. I mean, you talk about
Integrity.
leading with
Yeah.
integrity. Is that what the book's about? Is
Yeah.
about leading and that sort of thing? Tell us about that.
Yeah. 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 So, um, yeah, the book kind of was born out of my own pain and suffering. I went through a divorce, like I said, and during that time of my divorce, you know, I, I, I developed a problem with alcohol, and I, spent about 2 years just sort of spinning my spinning in circles, and not really knowing the path back. And one day I was had a sponsor who said, Chuck, the reason your life is in such a mess is you're just out of integrity. And I thought, okay, if that's what it is, the solution then is to get into integrity. Well, what does integrity mean? And I'll ask this to guys oftentimes, like, well, what's that integrity mean? And they're like, well, it means like, you know, uh, being honest. And I'm like, yeah, it's part of it. Well, integrity is actually, if you take the word integrity, the first part, integra, is about the same word as in integration. Okay? Integrity is an integration of your virtues, your values.
Hmm.
Okay?
Okay.
So when I'm in integrity, I I I have a sense of well-being. When I'm out of integrity, I generally have a discomfort, right? So, but if I don't know what these are, and so what I've done is I've listed out 16 virtues:
Hmm.
um, courage, tenacity, loyalty, wisdom, generosity, temperance. I'm just, there's 16 of them, right? So, and the idea is like, okay, so if I don't know what my values are, how can I stay in alignment? And it's a way to kind of look at it. And I think there's more than probably 16 virtues, but these were 16 of the ones that I came up with that were the most important to me. And so each chapter is a chapter on, so the first chapter is on courage. What does it mean to be courageous? I define courage as it doesn't mean you're not afraid. I mean, courage literally requires fear because courage is the ability to move forward in the face of fear. And so if I'm afraid and I don't push through and act courageously, the shadow side of that is cowardiceness.
Hmm.
I shrink back. Right? Yeah. And the next virtue is tenacity. Tenacity is just the ability to be able to stick with it. If I
Right.
say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. The opposite of that then would be giving up all the time. Giving up before things are finished or never finishing anything. Loyalty, that's a big one with people. Loyal, right? Loyal to means that I'm not going to betray someone. Probably the person that we tend to betray the most, at least in my case, it was myself. I didn't know how to be loyal to myself,
Sure.
you know? Wisdom is another one. And I think a lot of guys kind of get stuck in this idea of like we collect knowledge, read self-help books, listen to podcasts, watch YouTube, collecting all this knowledge, but that's not wisdom. Wisdom is actually taking what you know and doing what you know to do. Because otherwise you're just collecting books on your shelf, make you feel good. Uh, So there's
Well,
16 of these things. So each chapter walks through that. And I talk about, my own journey, journeys that I have had with other men that I've worked with over the years, just how I've seen them take this concept of integrity and use it to turn their lives around. And um, and integrity is not a natural thing. You know, the natural thing is for us to not be courageous, to kind of shrink, to not tell the truth. The natural thing is to, you know, um, you know, not, temperance, the ability of like everything in moderation. My natural self, that sort of id part of myself goes, I want it all. I want it all right now, right?
right.
Overindulgence. So as a result of that, integrity really has to come from a deeper part of yourself. And and the way I define that then is if something is natural, in order to override that requires a supernatural strength. And that supernatural strength then is what is bigger than myself that can help me stay in alignment. And
Okay.
I think the other thing to really quickly mention here is we're never fully in alignment with integrity. There's always some way that we're kind of getting blown off course. But just like a pilot, in an airplane is constantly getting blown off course, you've got these instruments to help you correct course.
Interesting.
So that's kind of the idea behind that.
Okay. If I mean, there isn't a man out there, if you asked him, that wouldn't say, yes, I strive to be, at one with my integrity, with honor, with
Hmm.
loyalty.
Hmm.
These are words that every one of us, um, at least on the surface, respect and are
Hmm.
and aspire to. Um,
Hmm.
Given that we all want to live a life like that,
Hmm.
why is it so difficult for so many men to actually put that into practice?
Yeah, well, kind of the psychology. I mean, sort of if you go back to, even like if you look at like Freudian psychology, there's yeah, and if you think about you like psychology, religion, philosophy, all of these different things, we talk about there is this split in us. Freud would call it the id, the ego, and the superego. Christianity might call it the natural man and the spiritual man. Buddhism might call it the yin and the yang. That
Mm,
there's these parts of ourselves, the part of me that wants to do good, and there's a part of me that's like, screw it, you know, just give me, gimme, gimme, gimme.
right.
So we have these two parts in ourselves. And then there's the me that's me in the middle, right? So on the one hand, I've got instinctual drive saying, go have sex with as many women as possible. And then I have this other more enlightened part of myself that says, yeah, but if you do that, your wife's going to be angry. She might leave you. And then there's the me in the middle that's going, I want both of these things. I want both of these things, right?
I'm sorry. I just didn't know where you were going with that,
Yeah.
and that was pretty good. So
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
get caught off guard too much, but that was all right. Right.
But how do we manage that part in the middle? And that's where I think integrity lies then is like an acknowledgement of, yeah, I have this shadow side of myself, but I also have this higher part of myself, and I've got to be able to stay in balance with these two things.
Okay.
So, yeah, and I think we struggle with it because, like again, if you look at all of the philosophies and religions and all of that, they're trying to answer the question of why is it that I do the thing that I don't want to do, and I do the thing I don't want to do, but I don't do the thing that's actually good for me. And that's just been, as long as there's been humanity, I think we've struggled with that.
Temptation's too
And
great.
yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah,
You said a minute ago that in order to be in a line with integrity, it takes a superhuman type of strength.
yeah.
So is that something that men possess and can tap into, or is that something that they somehow have to, build? And if so, how do they do that?
Yeah, I think it's again, it's like, where does this come from? Where does the idea of like I want, because if it's natural, like we're just animals here and
Hmm.
we get into our baser instincts. Or there's this other part of it, it's like, what causes people to, if somebody's down and out to help lend a helping hand. There's this other part of myself that also wants that. Where does that come from? You know? And it's kind of like I think it kind of comes from a larger part of myself, whether you want to call it the collective conscious or you want to call it the universe or you want to call it God. It's something bigger than me that we all need to have a purpose bigger than myself. And I think it's learning to tap into what is that thing that's bigger than me and being able to kind of sit with that and say, yeah, I want to be a good man, you know, and I need help doing that. So that might be power greater than myself, might be a group of men. Okay. On my own, left to my own devices, I'm powerless, but put me in a group where there's accountability, where there's other men doing the work, it's easier for me to do that. There's a leverage in that. So that leverage to tap into really comes from my relationships with other men. It's like, you can join a gym, but if you join a gym and you go with a buddy every day, you're probably going to have more consistency and more accountability.
Sure.
And that's the
Interesting.
power greater than yourself.
When you say power greater than yourself, my we're a fairly Christ-centered podcast, so I mean,
Okay.
we talk about God all the time,
Okay, great.
and so that's where my head goes. I
Yeah.
immediately start going, "Well, you lean into your faith," but then you bring up
Hmm.
a good point about it doesn't have to just be that; it can also be this brotherhood,
Yeah.
with men. That's interesting that that you
Yeah.
can draw the strength that way, and yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think here's the thing is like, from a Christian perspective, we're called to be brethren, right? We're called to, we are social beings, a story that I tell oftentimes is when I was moving into a new office with my practice, and I had this big couch, and I had it delivered to the office, and I was like, well, I can move this myself into my office, and I did, and I struggled. I took me, but I did it. I did it. You know. Whereas I could have gone down the hall and knocked on a door and said, "Hey, I got this couch. Can you help me move this?" But my pride kept me from doing that, you know.
yeah,
Whereas the humility would be going and knocking on the door and saying, "Hey, can you help me with this?" And I think that's what happens is we don't ask for help. We think we're supposed to do it on our own. And so part of the integrity actually is like having enough humility to say, that's one of the chapters on humility. I can't do this by myself. I need somebody else to help me with this. And that's the power greater than myself is that. And so if I'm in a brotherhood with men who have the same values, that have the same, Christ consciousness in their life that they're following, then I'm going to find more power from that than I am on my own. I kind of
cool,
think like, you know, be a guy who's going to be like, he's standing there, you know, before God, and he's like, God, why didn't you help me? I was standing there. And he's like, dude, there was like five guys around you that you could have just asked. Like, why didn't you ask for some help? You come to me, you know, but like they were right there.
right. And now we've talked about a lot of stuff in terms of leadership, getting in line with integrity. So we may have already sort of answered this, sort of one of the last questions I have for you here, but I know that I'll get beaten up if I don't ask this. So
Okay.
we got to get just like
Yeah, let's do it.
just right down to the brass tacks because in almost not every, but in almost every case of guys that I talk to or contribute to our group or anything like that, where the marriage is not doing well either the leading factor from the guy's side or at least a contributing factor is that it's a sexless marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how it's become over the years. And I know
Mm-hmm.
there's a zillion reasons why that may
Yep.
happen and so on. Um, what can men, I mean, we talked about, leading and things like this. Maybe we've already tapped, the answer. I'm going to leave it to you to maybe just connect the dots.
Yeah.
I don't want guys to have to think through anything we talked about to get to the answer of this. I want to be able to
Right, right.
say, what do I do to start to change that,
Mhm.
um, so that
And
I'm
that's such
not
a
in a sexless marriage? Yeah, go ahead.
that's such a guy's perspective.
Right,
Tell me what I need to do in order to
right.
change this,
I
right?
know
Give
my
me a
audience,
bullet
man.
point. Give me the
I
list.
I know my
What do I
guys.
got to do here? Yeah, yeah, yeah. And part of what I'm saying is not about doing, it's about being, becoming. Okay. Becoming the man that she can trust, that she wants to open up to. Right. I would say that for most women, the connection starts to dissipate oftentimes after children come in. Her world is suddenly all about the kids, right? And the guy's like, I got nothing that they want. And she seems to be completely busy. And rather than, being part of that world, they kind of go off and like, well, I guess I'll go make money. I guess I'll go, do this. I'm not
Right.
needed over here. And so it feels like she's disconnecting, but the guy is actually disconnecting. He's failing to go, you know,
Hmm.
go and be like, how, let me lead in this, you know, let me be the dad. Let me be you will be the mom and dad. What I find happens is, when you first get married, we come in and we're husband and wife, and then kids come in, and now we've got two new roles, mom and dad. And what happens is we've got these little humans that are dependent on us for life, that they become the most important thing. And so it kind of gets flipped up upside down where mom and dad become more important than husband, wife. And the problem with this is if you don't have a strong husband, wife, then the marriage dissolves. And now you have mom and dad. You're still mom and dad, but you're living in separate houses. So the roles of
Hmm.
mom and dad stay there, but the role of husband and wife. So I think one of the things that men can be passive about is I'm trying to get her attention away from the kids. And because of her mama bear instinct, she's like, you're not going to do that. But we have to find a way to break her out of that. Here's the thing about sex, um, the difference between men and women. I think Billy Crystal put it best. He said, women need a reason for sex, men just need a place.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for her, for the feminine, it it comes down to um it comes down to for her, like she needs to feel this safety. It comes down to context. Okay. And for her, context is everything else is taken care of. I don't have to worry about anything. Now I can relax and open myself up.
Hmm.
Okay. So what happens? So a lot of times I would say, the couple will, you know, kids will be with mom and dad. The couple will go away for a weekend. And they have this great weekend. They connect sexually, maybe for the first time in a long time. And then they come home, and as soon as they hit the door, it's like, we're right back to it. That's because the context has changed. Okay. In the weekend away, she knew the kids weren't there. They weren't a distraction. The context was she's in some place outside of the domicile. She doesn't have to think about cleaning anything up. She doesn't have to worry about all these different things. And she suddenly became safe, felt safe to where she could open up. Right.
Hmm.
So as men, we miss that. Right. Because I don't need all of that. Heck, I can have sex, any time under, the kids can be screaming in the next door and I'll
Right.
block them out, right?
Yep.
But she can't do that. So one of the things that happens is as we become passive, is we're not creating context for the sexuality. Another thing that I think is really important, guys get this wrong all the time. When do most guys put the moves on?
Well, that's a tough one. Um,
Um,
I
I would
would
think like,
guess. Go ahead.
yeah, generally it's kind of like, okay, the kids are in bed. It's the end
Yeah.
of the day. We're getting in bed together, which is where sex happens. All right.
Right.
The evening is the worst time to have sex.
Okay. We got an opinion here. Okay. I can't
Yeah.
wait to hear you back that one up.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
I'm bringing what's left over.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
what's left over is basically like I just want to feel good. I just want to, have an orgasm so I can go to sleep. That's not connection,
Right.
you know? Real connection is I'm bringing the best of myself. I'm bringing me fully and you're bringing you fully and we're in a, in a way working through our purpose of creating connection and creating sexual connected energy because we know that if we don't do this, the connection starts to dissipate. And if the connection starts to dissipate, then who suffers? The family.
Wow.
And as a man, if I'm leading like that and I'm creating context and I'm, like, hey, here's what, like letting her know my desire for her, but also letting her know, like, I get that you need to feel completely safe, completely like all these distractions gone away in order for you to open up. So let's create the context for you.
Hmm. Okay.
And, I think that that's best served, when you've created time and space for it.
Nice.
And it's not to say that, quickies are bad or having the, sex at night before you go to bed is bad or anything like that. I'm just saying that if that's all we're having though, yeah.
Okay, I appreciate you bringing that home like that and just kind of tying it all up and putting a bow on it for guys.
Yeah.
I think some guys are out there nodding their heads and some are look kind of going, "Hmm, all right, now what do I do?"
Right.
I
Yeah.
think that's kind of
Okay.
our
All right.
state of norm, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah. All right.
But
Yeah, yeah. So here's
uh,
what you do. All right.
right, exactly. Give me my checklist so I can get this done and solve this problem. I
Uh-huh.
want to fix
Yeah.
everything.
I want to fix it, right?
That's right,
So, yeah.
exactly. The only thing that I just still on my sheet that I wanted to just touch on real quick was just you mentioned nice guy syndrome.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious if that's a lot of what we've talked about already, or if it's actually a separate, entity to what we've talked
It's a little
about.
bit of both. It's a little bit of
Okay.
both, I think. Okay. So, are you familiar with the nice guy syndrome?
I hope that I'm not, but I'm afraid I am.
Okay. All right. All right. So, there's a book written about 20 years ago by a called No More Mr. Nice Guy by Robert Glover.
Okay.
And uh, he 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 talks about this idea that, guys will say, "Well, I'm the nicest guy in the world. I'm really nice. I do everything she wants me to do, right?" But then when it comes to like really being honest, hey, you know what? I need this. When it comes to entering into conflict, when it comes to making their needs a priority, they kind of do it on the sly, tell a half truth, cover up their mistakes, try to, make sure she's not angry with me
Hmm.
because I want to
Okay.
be seen as a nice guy, right? And in reality, that's not really nice behavior. It's not nice behavior to lie to somebody or cover up your mistakes or not really lead with what it is that I want or try to manipulate somebody into giving me what I want without me asking. And so nice guys are fraudulently nice. They're the kind of guys that will tell you what you want to hear and then go do what they want to do. They're the kind of guy that will pretend like he's not good at laundry so that she'll take over and do all the laundry,
Sure.
you know? Oh, I just don't know what I'm doing. I didn't know you weren't supposed to separate, the colors from the white. Nice guys uh, are afraid of conflict, so they'll do whatever they can to avoid that. And and so the idea that he brings out in the book is the opposite of a nice guy isn't a jerk. The opposite of a nice guy is what he calls an integrated man, which kind of goes back to the integration of integrity. But the integrated
Okay.
man uh, has this, says what he wants, with unapologetically, goes after his needs, isn't afraid of conflict, or at least if he may be afraid of it, but he enters into it. He has courage and enters into conflict. That he understands that it's not his job to make his wife happy, you know, any more than it's her job to make him happy. That uh, he's not responsible for her decisions any more than she's responsible for his. And he can see her as an individual rather than an extension of himself. In other words,
Hmm.
the
Wow.
way I feel about me is how she feels about me. So if she's not happy, oh, what am I going to do about that? Rather than just like, okay, sounds like she needs a little bit of space here. Work it out.
No, I'm glad I asked you that question. I really am because that was different. That was different. I appreciate that explanation.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
as we kind of wrap things up here, and I appreciate everything you've shared with my guys, here that listen to us today. Let me just kind of put it out there to you. Is
Hmm.
there anything I forgot to ask you about, or anything that maybe we talked about and you want to make sure you drive home, to these guys that are
Mm.
listening? We're about 85% men. So, when I
Yeah,
say my
okay.
guys, I'm not kidding
I mean,
around.
you guys. I
That's
mean, you
right.
guys. Yeah,
Or, a piece
yeah.
of advice or leave behind. The floor is yours for the last couple of minutes while we
Okay.
wrap things up, Chuck.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, I guess if there's one thing I wanted to leave your guys with, it's this: that it's good to be a man. Like we should embrace that. You know, like I was just on a podcast recently, and the host afterwards he said, I have all these women that come on. I talk about women empowerment. Like you're the first guy that's come on that talked about masculine empowerment. I'm like, yeah, we need more of that. You know, this idea like it's good to be a man. I don't have to, I don't have to apologize for having a sex drive. I don't have to apologize for having wants and needs. Now, I need to be respectful. I can't be a jerk about it and that kind of thing. But like, yeah, I'm a guy and I like being a guy. And I'm not saying I'm better than it's not better. It's just that I I think as men we've apologized for being men long enough, and that
Yeah.
we feel like, we're afraid of being canceled. We're afraid of, the things like the Me Too movement, and not saying those weren't legit, but I am saying that those kind of things create this fear in men that says I can't actually be me. And
Yeah.
And so if I were going to say anything, the thing that I learned the most in my own work and was something I really needed to hear early on was that being a man is a wonderful thing. It's a it's a gift, it's a privilege, it's an honor, and to show up as if it's a gift, it's a privilege, and it's an honor.
Nice.
And that the masculine penetrates. My job is to penetrate the world with my love. And
Nice.
how can I be so good masculinity penetrates with love. And as a masculine, I'm the source of love. And, you know, where do I get the source of love from? I get the source of love from the higher masculine. You know? So,
Wow. I'm glad I gave you the floor. All right. So you've got a course that these guys can look up,
yeah,
and
so
it's
they just go to chuckchapman.com. I've got
okay.
all the information there.
Yep.
Yeah, you can get my book, The Path 16 Virtues of Integrity on Amazon. You can also follow me on Instagram. It's just chuckchapman.ma. I have a YouTube channel that's at Chuck Chapman. Um, yeah,
Awesome. Awesome. I'll make sure all that stuff is in the show notes for everybody. And
thanks.
yeah, Chuck Chapman, author and men's psychology expert. Chuck, thanks for coming on today. I mean,
Thanks,
I
Ryan. Thanks
enjoyed
for
the
having me, man.
conversation,
You
and I'm
too.
sure everybody else did too. So thanks a lot,
Yeah.
brother.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, gentlemen, you've heard yet another episode of the Power Man podcast. The reason that we bring on these powerful men to talk about these really powerful topics that, especially today, where they're topics that we're all thinking about, we're all talking about, but none of us really want to, own or discuss in public, things like that. Um, this is the place for that. This is the place where you can come and you can have that brotherhood and you can listen and you can speak and you can express yourself. And the reason you need to do that, guys, and I tell you this all the time, is because you have value and you matter. And at some point, you just have to believe it, brothers. Until next time.